This podcast is certified fresh. Freshmediaworks.com.
Are you ready to take your game to the next level? Whether you're an athlete, coach, or just someone striving for more success in life, the Winner's Workshop is your secret weapon. Yes, this award-winning course has transformed thousands of lives, teaching the game-changing principles of sports psychology that Fortune 500 companies, coaches, and top performers all use to win. The Winner's Workshop, subtitled How Sports Psychology Can Make You a Champion, is now available on CoachTube for a fraction of the original $499 price. The Winner's Workshop will help you master focus, mindset, and breakthroughs to make you a champion. Click on the link in the show notes or head over to LoneStarGridiron.com and click on the ad today to unlock your full potential.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Master Coach's Wednesday Weekly Buzz. Sponsored by SNA Sports Group, a leader in volleyball equipment. I'm Bob Bertucci, joined by fellow Master Coaches Mick Haley, Tom Hilbert, and Jim Stone. Our show today is edition 3 on college athletics, the impact it might have on volleyball. And our guest is none other than Executive Director of the American Volleyball Coaches Association, Mr. Jaime Gordon. Jaime, welcome back.
Thanks, Bob. I feel like, like Saturday Night Live, if you've been on it enough, you get like a 5-timer jacket. I'm waiting for the blue background, like when I can start using that.
Nice.
All right, we're going to, Jaime is really back, just for the audience to give the AVCA membership and all the coaches around the world an update on the ever-changing landscape of college athletics in the United States. And we'll be talking about some other topics like the Women's National Championships, all right, and the AVCA convention and why it's important that you attend throughout the show. But let's go ahead and I'm going to throw it over to Jim Stone to get us started right away, Jaime, because he has a bunch of questions he'd like to get started with. So go ahead, Jim.
Thanks, Bob. And actually, Jaime, if it's okay, before I ask any questions, can you give us being the listeners, kind of an update in terms of the direction we're going with college athletics, the House settlement, a timeline, and just kind of a broad overview of where we're at this point and how it might impact or be impacting college volleyball?
Yeah, and I'll just as a kind of a review. There is a really large lawsuit that has a proposed settlement between a class of students, athletes, and the NCAA and the Power Four conferences. And that was all based on student athletes' inability to earn money from name, image, and likeness. And so when the NCAA changed the rule, a group of athletes followed by some attorneys came back and sued and said, hey, you kept us from all of this opportunity to make money. And the settlement is kind of based in two parts. One is back pay, which is about $2.7 billion to be paid over 10 years. And then the other part, which is probably getting a lot more of the attention, is future changes to the structure of college athletics. One of those big being revenue share, and which now permits the colleges, Division I institutions, an opportunity to share revenue with student athletes. And there's a formula in how much that is. It's, I think, right now at about $22 million a year for each institution. That's kind of built on an average. So there are some institutions that have more revenue, some Division I and the Power Four that are below, but they've set this at a $22 million kind of threshold to be able to spend that out. Along with this, for schools that are not part of the Power Four, the rest of Division One, then have an option to either opt into some of the terms of this settlement moving forward, or opt out of it and kind of say, "Hey, we're going to operate as we have been." All institutions are, whether they want to opt in or not, still have to pay the back pay. So any mid-major institution is still helping cover the bill associated with this settlement. But things like revenue share, elimination of scholarship caps, the implementation of roster caps. So, hey, instead for the sport of volleyball, you're only permitted to have 18 people on the roster. On women, there used to be there was a scholarship maximum of 12. On men's volleyball, it's 4.5. On beach, it's 6 equivalencies. Those limitations would be eliminated, but you would have to operate within a roster cap. And theoretically, you could provide all of those athletes on that roster. So that's kind of where we are right now. And there's a lot of different opinions, some objections to the settlement, some feelings of how do we adjust. And there's a lot of detail that needs to be worked out right now with this.
Okay, fair enough. And we could ask 500 questions here, so I'll limit myself to one, and then I'll hand it off to Mick. What I see, and let's focus my question on those schools that are opting in, where they have the ability in one way, shape, or form to pay athletes. The terrain right now seems to be, and I'm in the left field bleachers, and I admit that, but it seems to be the players are leaving programs in seemingly just a mass migration. And my concern is with the coaches and their ability to run a program with absolutely no assurances of players being there from one season to the next. And my impression is we're taking care of the athletes. Okay, fair enough. And, part of that might be philosophical. Part of that is our legal system in action. But who's taking care of the coaches? And what are our coaches going to do when, case in point, what's seemingly happening at a particular institution, their entire lineup is leaving and seeking greener pastures. Is the AVCA doing anything? And I don't want to get too far over my skis with my question, but how can the AVCA nudge the legislation with the NC2A in terms of where are we going with this? And from my perspective, we're dealing with professional athletes. Well, professional athletes have contracts. And would a contract system at least give the coaches the ability to sleep at night knowing that this player is going to be back next year? So that's a very long question, and you can take it in whatever direction you want.
Jim, it's a really interesting concept, and I think some of this will probably get played out a little bit in the basketball and football space, because they're already operating in these massive changes in roster. University of Kentucky, when John Calipari left for Arkansas and Mark Pope comes in as the new coach at Kentucky, there was nobody on the roster. Everybody's gone. So you're starting from scratch. And all of you guys would think if you had to start a program from scratch and try to find a roster and put together a team, like, this is going to take years and years and years. They were able to put something together. I don't think they're in the top 10 right now. So there's a part of the landscape and around athletics that allows for, yes, there's a movement out, but there's a transfer portal and there's ability to fill roster spots on the backside of it. From the contractual side of what will tie athletes in, I'm very intrigued to see what happens in the football and basketball space with some of this rev share. What will that look like? Is it going to be, used as a recruiting tool? Is it going to be used as a talent retention? Is it going to be performance based? Like you might see in some professional sports where there's bonuses. Are there going to be contractual obligations alongside of it? That in order to get paid, you need to be enrolled come August 1st or September 1st or whatever there. So I think, yes, it's going to impact volleyball, but I have a feeling that basketball and football are going to figure this out a little bit more in what will maybe hold some of the student athletes to their commitments with institutions. It's I think a great case in free market and open market dynamics to see, hey, then if I'm a top recruit and I've got all four of you recruiting me, does money become a part of it? Does terms of the contract come? What's guaranteed? What gives me an out? And again, that would probably be no different than a coach has in their contracts. What is my buyout? What do I have to pay my employer if I leave? What does my employer have to pay me if they break the contract? So I think some of what we have already in coaches' contracts, I don't know, maybe we'll start seeing those terms presenting themselves in student athlete agreements. We've already gotten rid of the national letter of intent. I stopped using the acronyms because I keep mixing it up with NLI and NIL and stuff like that. But those financial terms that are tying student athletes to their institutions, I can see those starting to evolve a little bit here as well.
Yeah, and one quick follow-up, and I'll pass it along. I hear what you're saying, and I don't want to get totally off on a tangent. But at the end of the day, athletic directors want a successful volleyball program, and coaches are making some more than others, but a good salary. So, man, the stress on the coaches right now is off the charts, and that's why whatever impact the AVCA can have on, with the motivation being, we got to take care of our coaches here. We're taking care of the athletes, but we got to take care of our coaches, and whatever form that manifests itself, like you said, we'll see. But I think it's a real situation out there that we don't want to just turn our backs on. So with all that pontification, Mick, I'll pass it on to you.
Yeah, I'll jump right into how you were using Kentucky as an example of filling a roster. I'm sure they're filling it with NIL deals. I mean, that's usually the way this works. They're not just offering a scholarship. They're actually having to pay players from other programs to come in and fill those spots. And that leads me to the future. Who's going to really monitor NIL? And are there going to be additional lawsuits directed with NIL? How do you see the whole NIL thing and parent litigation over lost roster spots to go with that?
Yeah, I think that, Mick, that is probably one of the biggest parts of this settlement that maybe hasn't gotten the real attention that maybe it warrants. And as part of this is the NIL can then start to come into the institution. So right now we have collectives because the NCAA says an athletics department cannot manage name, image, and likeness payments to student athletes. And so you have either businesses or collectives that work there. Part of this settlement actually places the name, image, and likeness process into the athletics department. So now, as the athletics director, in the same way that I have my media rights that is sold to a company like JMI or Learfield or something like that, hey, we're going to help manage your name, image, and likeness. And so now there starts to be a lot more paperwork. There's the process of monitoring it, and then there's another kind of component in this the settlement, which is a third party to oversee and manage that, so that even if there is a collective or there is something that's even outside of the athletics department, that there is a reporting process so that it is clear that the money that they're getting is legitimate, because the NCAA is still trying to hold on to the amateurism and not having this be pay for play. And that it's truly the revenue share from media rights, its name, image, and likeness for promotional stuff, and that it is not straight inducement. And that's where, even if you look at name, image, and likeness payments in two buckets, there's legitimate stuff that, hey, you've made an appearance, you're on a billboard, you're doing a radio commercial, and we're paying you for that. Then there's where probably the bigger chunk is, which is in talent acquisition. And the NCAA is really trying to get the toothpaste back in the tube from the talent acquisition side of things and bring that more in-house. So the last part I would say of that is a third party, and especially when we have a legal agreement. So this becomes a court settlement. If somebody breaks it, if a coach breaks that rule, it starts to be more than just the NCAA manual. You might have legal implications, and if you have things like subpoenas for records and stuff like that, that can totally change even the enforcement process with having a third party. And I've yet to really understand who that third party is, but that is a whole very interesting component of this settlement that I think the details as they play out will be very, very informative to pay attention to.
Just to throw in a last interesting little thought, are any existing men's programs likely to be favored in this new environment?
I think there could be. Like, even in the new environment, what you'll have is the elimination, at least, of the scholarship restrictions. You know, the fact that men's volleyball has had to operate at Division I level with only a maximum of 4.5 equivalencies. To say maybe Hawaii says, hey, we actually make some money here in men's volleyball. We've got some revenue. Hey, we want to invest in that. We really want to make sure that we have a national championship contending program year in, year out. I don't know what the stresses will be on an Ohio State or a Penn State or a UCLA to say, hey, are they going to be able to really move into it? But at least there's not, I would say, the restriction around maybe some of the growth portions. I am concerned on men's volleyball of the roster limitations because a lot of rosters that may have 24, 25 on there, any institution that opts in, they're going to have to reduce that roster to 18. And so I don't like the fact that we're eliminating opportunities. But to your point, Mick, I think the structure there could allow for more investment. But as administrators are trying to make decisions on how they come up with this new expenditure, is that going to be, hey, there's immediate investment in men's volleyball? I would probably say no right now, but maybe down the road as the sport continues to grow, I'm hopeful, but I'm an optimist too.
All right, Tom.
Yeah, I'm going to make a comment first and then ask you a question. And the comment, well, you mentioned Learfield and some of those major marketing players, and they are getting involved in helping bring big NIL deals. And the one that I've seen is Colorado, because if you walk through the DIA, it has United Airlines, the official airline of the Colorado Buffaloes, and it's got Shedeur Sanders' picture on there, which they're using CU's marks. So what that means is that Learfield, the University of Colorado, and Shedeur Sanders have a combined deal. And so those things are happening now, which I find very interesting. And I think the companies like Learfield could be pretty powerful. My question for you is this one, and it's going to kind of put you on the spot, because I heard this from a source that I'm not going to reveal, but it was an athletic director who said that with the new presidential election, we could see some political push to give the NCAA an antitrust exemption. Have you heard that, and can you expand on that?
Sure. Yeah, I think the results from November make it a lot more possible for legislation to get through. Okay. I think it's very important to recognize that it is not going to be a partisan bill, because for anything to get through the Senate is still going to need to pass the 60 votes. Okay. But and this is not to get into politics. This is just informational. But Ted Cruz will be the chair of the Commerce Committee. A lot of this legislation will come through that committee. He has been very public in the importance of a collegiate legislative package to come through. I think there are three big pieces to any legislation that's going to be passed. One is student employment. That needs to be addressed. Preemption of state laws, so especially around the NIL space. And Tom, you know, from just being involved in the Colorado area, California has different rules than Georgia. And so we've got this patchwork of ways that states are permitted to manage name, image, and likeness rules. So they need to get something on the federal side. And then the third prong is some sort of legal protection, some sort of antitrust component to that. And that is really important, because every time a rule changes, you open yourself up for litigation for things in the past. That's exactly what we are here in this name, image, and likeness suit and settlement. It is interesting because from the antitrust side, there's going to be some resistance in certain parts of Congress to just provide that. And I think there'll be some negotiation, but probably in the last, and really, I mean, the NCAA has spent millions and millions of dollars lobbying to try to get some help out of the federal government. I would say that the current structure probably presents the best opportunity for some meaningful legislation to come through.
So, Jamie, if I can translate this from English to English, does this mean that the NCAA role is going to change, but they're still going to be in existence? Because you talked about putting the toothpaste back in the, in the tube. Is the NCAA going to have this antitrust, law, if you will, to allow them to be able to operate? And will they still be the NCAA running college athletics?
Yeah, I think there's one of the pieces, or I know you will say, I'll call it a benefit if I'm the NCAA. One of the benefits of this settlement is that this is a 10-year agreement. Okay, so there becomes this legal bind between the Power Four conferences and the NCAA. They have to pay this together. They have to do all these things together. So if there becomes this significant break off, there becomes a change in the potential of this settlement. So I think there is a bond that this brings. There is no doubt that some level of antitrust protection would be massively beneficial to keeping the NCAA together, to protecting from litigation that comes daily, really, for them. And I don't like things that don't have checks and balances, but I do think that some level of protection here is needed for us to be able to move forward as college athletics.
Are we positive about the NC2A? It seems like they have been terribly mismanaged. And is this something we want to continue, or should we start over with a new group?
I don't disagree with you, Mick, that there's been mismanagement, and maybe I would even say lack of leadership in the past.
Sure.
I do like Charlie Baker. He may be having to make some decisions that are not popular, but I think a lot of that has been a result of the past leadership of the NCAA just didn't make changes. There was
Right.
I think, head in the sand approach to things. And so, Charlie's been making some really bold changes and things at times that aren't necessarily popular. And again, I think trying to move evolution into the fast lane, which just the way things go, I think the NCAA is probably trying to make up about 15 years of changes in a span of a year and a half to 2 years. So I think an implosion. What the saying is that order comes from chaos. I personally like to not be in the middle of chaos right now. I'd like to see if we can create some order. It feels pretty chaotic already, and I couldn't imagine, because if this thing blows up, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit. There's an amazing championship going on right now. If now all of a sudden the AVCA and USA Volleyball and some other entity have to run our championship, I'm not saying that down the road it can't be as good, but I would hate for us as a sport to lose the momentum that we have, really in all areas.
So, Jamie, you just brought up championships, and that's one of the things that we wanted to talk about. And we've discussed this opting out, and maybe what it means, tying those things together. If a school mid-major is opting out, how much do they have to pay, all right, into this total big fund to take care of past athletes? And then if they opt out, are they going to look at Division III and Division II and talk about those championships? And we just had the Division III championships, and tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, the financial structure of Division I athletics is definitely changing, and I've had many conversations with different mid-major athletics directors, and there is a lot of uncertainty of what the landscape looks like. So I spoke to one last week, and he was like, I don't know what the hell I'm opting into. Like, I don't have the structure. We don't know exactly what this looks like. So even knowing whether I'm going to opt in or not, until I know the details, man, I can't make that decision. There is a fear that if I don't opt in, I lose access to the championships, and specifically men's basketball championship. So, most mid-majors that's where they're, buttering their bread is on men's basketball and making making it into the tournament, making a run in the tournament, trying to be competitive there. And so I think there is an uncertainty of, like, if I'm not in the game, am I going to lose access to championships? Are other schools not going to schedule me because I'm not opting in, or I'm not in that same categorization? They also don't know what the time frame is. Do I need to opt in right away? Do I have a year to do so? Can I wait and see things? So I think there's a lot that needs to be, figured out. As you start looking at what point does Division II or Division III make sense? I think it all is based on the financial model. If all of a sudden I can't afford to maintain my position in Division I, if I'm losing my tuition revenue, I spoke to an AD, and they had quantified that opting in and going under the roster caps and having to cut people off of their rosters would cost the institution about $12 million in tuition revenue. So by opting in, they're already going to see institutionally a $12 million reduction in revenue but then we're going to have to potentially pay out money to student athletes. So now all of a sudden they're like, geez, I don't know that we can afford to do that. So maybe that type of institution goes, hey, maybe we do need to look into a different model at the Division II or Division III level. But I still think there's so much that needs to really play itself out. And again, to know, I mean, that's at the end of the day, the NCAA runs championships. They do that well. They run championships pretty well. And the access to that championship is why people are in Division I for the most part. And if that comes into question or the expense associated with that access really changes, then I think you might see some administrations making some very difficult decisions.
Is there a dollar amount for opting out yet, or they still don't know that figure?
No, I think you're going to have to figure out what that may mean, because if I'm, let's say if I'm because I was the athletics director there, if I'm Morehead State and I rely on maybe 4 to 5 guarantee games for basketball, and I make on average $90,000 to $100,000 per those games. So that's $450,000 that is revenue, real revenue that helps support what we're doing. If me opting out no longer allows me access to those guarantee games, or reduces my value to those so that I'm only making 40 or 50, now I start seeing some real expense of opting out. I'm already going to have to pay the amount through some Division I reductions in distribution. It's probably going to be, I'm thinking, $250,000 to $300,000 a year for 10 years. And if I'm, again, a mid-major, if I was at Morehead State, I had already planned on doing something with $300,000. Now I've got to come up with that somewhere else. So all of these things start to compound as how do I cover that? My insurance costs are going up. If I'm an athletics director and I've got athletic trainers, that is a massive problem right now. And so I'm having to pay trainers more. I'm having to do I've got all of these expenses that are increasing. And now I've also got this new thing that I haven't been planning on or projecting. So yeah, these things all are adding to costs in different ways if I choose to opt out of the settlement.
Tom, you have a question for Jamie?
Well, I'd like to switch gears and talk about the championships right now. And it seems that we had better television coverage, and especially with these regionals. It looks like we're going to get a regional on on a network. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit? And is that helping? I guess, is the NCAA reaping financial benefit, or is volleyball still part of a big group TV contract?
Yeah. So let me talk about the contract, and then I'll go to the coverage side. So I guess it was last year, it's about a year ago, the NCAA signed a contract, a championships contract, an 8-year deal with Disney, so ESPN, ABC. And as they went through that process, they were valuing all of the champions. This is everything except men's basketball, by the way. So this is women's basketball, volleyball, baseball, softball, gymnastics, all the 90 championships. And so, and I'm not going to remember the exact number. I want to say it's maybe $130 million a year. I may be way off. It's just the number that's in my head. But as they went through those negotiations, volleyball had a value with it. And if you think about the championships, there's probably 2 categories in the ledger. Something that actually has a financial value and something that was a financial expense. So we'll use volleyball, for example. Women's indoor volleyball value, okay? There's a value to that. Men's volleyball is an expense. The production costs of doing that costs more than whatever you're going to be bringing in. This is not official, but just from some people that I spoke to, I think the women's championship was probably valued somewhere around $5 million. Okay. So that means when you look at tickets, all of this other stuff, and you take that $5 million in, the women's championship makes money. It's a profit for when you take everything into consideration. So now you have, and we'll just use that $5 million. So now you have an 8-year deal, which ESPN or Disney is paying about $5 million for volleyball. Okay. Now what ESPN wants to do is increase that value, because if they can increase that value within the 8 years, they're making more money. Okay. So if you think this year one, if they can get their $5 million value, they've broken even on what they're paying to the NCAA. But if next year it's $6 million, now they're $1 million into the good. And so they're trying to drive the value. There's value, there's value and importance for the NCAA and the sport of volleyball to also drive that, because when the next contract comes up in 8 years, you don't want to still be at 5 million. You want to be at 60 million. Okay. Because then that changes the whole thing. So now go back to the coverage that we're seeing. All right. We saw a regular season game match on ABC. ABC is putting on one of the regional finals. Every match of the regionals this year so that's the regional semis and the regional finals are on either ESPN2, ESPN, or ABC. The regionals are also spread out over 4 days. So we don't have this wake up in the morning until 2:00 in the morning run of games after each other. We've got matches going Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, okay, which are run by TV. The opening rounds, every match was on ESPN Plus, and then we saw their whip around fifth set on ESPN2. Like, that was unbelievable coverage. I had a blast watching it, and there was compelling volleyball. So we're seeing this now investment that ESPN and Disney are putting into volleyball, really in the same way that we saw that happen, I think, in women's basketball 20 years ago. And we've always been like jealous of the attention that women's basketball has gotten on ESPN. Well, we're really seeing the intention and the investment, an hour-long selection show on ESPN, a special that Katie George was doing. And I was going to the Lexington site to watch games in person, and was having dinner right before it. And in the restaurant, they had the fifth set going on ESPN2. And then I look over and soccer, okay, their national semifinals were on ESPNU. So here we are, open round, ESPN2, whip around, and you've got the national semifinals on ESPNU. So you really start to see where we are adjusting there. So I know that's a long answer to your question, but it's definitely something that I'm really excited about is what we're seeing in the exposure.
Hey, Jamie, staying with the current championships that are going on at Division One, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were able to observe, a silent observer for the Division One selection committee. Is that correct?
No, I would love to.
Oh, okay.
I would love to. I was just going to one of the sites.
Okay. Well, that's fine. But so now you can be totally unbiased in your opinion. My question is, I'm looking at the results for this past weekend. It seemed like the mid-majors equipped themselves really well, and which is fantastic for volleyball in our country. But if you're the athletic director at Morehead State, since you brought them up earlier, and my second place team in that conference is out of the tournament for the 9th place team in the Big Ten to get beat 3-0. Is it time, however you can phrase this, but is it time for the committee to start looking at what's in the best interest of volleyball on a more global perspective rather than just focusing on what's the RPI? because the RPI rewards specific conferences and teams more than others. And mid-majors have proven themselves that they can play the game as well. So if you're the AD at Moorhead and there's not going to be a chance for my second place team to get into the tournament, maybe I should allocate resources someplace else where they have a better shot at getting into a tournament in another sport. I mean, do you understand the direction I'm heading with that?
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, all administrators are figuring out, where do I invest money? Where am I going to get my bang for my buck? I just, I spent last week writing a letter. I don't want to necessarily say the conference, but a mid-major conference or not a Power Four conference. I sent a letter to every athletics director, SWA, the commissioner of the conference, and the key people in that conference office, highlighting all of the brag points for volleyball. Like, here is why you need to be looking to invest in it. Here's how good your conference could be, how good you already are, but with just some more investment, what you could do here. So I think there's a combination of us as coaches, and listen, there are 3 mid-majors, if I'm not mistaken, or 3 non-Power Fours in the Sweet 16 right now. And when you look at the other ones that had, they're also seeded. You had, gosh, Northern Iowa. They were this close to knocking off the number 4 seed. And like, when have we had that even one of the top 4 seeds has even been pushed, let alone be lucky to get out of a match with a win. So I think there's this really good opportunity. I mean, you have Loyola Chicago that beats BYU. So I think I would almost say that there's more more examples of, hey, you can actually do well in this. And I think it hopefully also tells coaches that they need to schedule aggressively. I mean, all of you guys were, but looking specifically, Tom, I mean, you had great success in the tournament and everything, and you always would go out and schedule real competitively, and we're very intentional about that. Of all the things that I would give credit to for the selection committee, the thing that I would give them the most applause is they clearly or took care of or benefited or rewarded competitive scheduling. Whether it was Louisville making a top 4 seed, whether it was somebody else getting in, or somebody being on the bubble and not getting in. So I think it also encourages some of those mid-majors that feel like, hey, I've got a shot to get in to go out and schedule aggressively.
So can I take this another step farther? I'll go back to the tournament and the contracts. How far away are we from revenue sharing for the teams in the tournament? And then think about that and think about how this works for basketball, especially men's basketball. And then start looking at the way the committee's putting the teams in from the Power Four conferences. It seems like we are going to be going the opposite way, because those conferences want the additional money of getting extra teams into the tournament. But it doesn't lend to our ability to expand our sports awareness and have it be as popular as men's basketball tournament is, for instance, because you want to see those first and second rounds. You want to see those small schools knocking off the big schools. It's pretty darn fun. And people take a whole day off just to watch those games, or 2 days off or 3 days off. They go on vacation to watch those things if they can. How far away are we from that with the women's volleyball? And just kind of follow that line of thinking for a second. And what are your comments about that?
Yeah. So, the rev share side of things, I think, is a really interesting point. They've added now women's basketball as,
right,
performance credits based on how you do into the tournament. I could see, and I think what you're starting to see happen is this separation of some sports. I was speaking to an official at the NCAA, and he used a term called the ESPN championships. And so that's women's basketball, baseball, softball, women's volleyball. Like, hey, these are our properties that are making money. And so if you can also then tie some sort of performance unit back to those sports, I think it also encourages more investment into those sports on a local level. So I think that part is really intriguing. I'm sorry, Mick, there was another part to that question, and I was
well, sure. So to get back to whether it's a good idea, for instance, we identified a couple of teams that made it into the tournament that had lost 5 matches in a row. And we thought they were on the downslide, and the committee should view that as a negative for that team because their performance at the end was sliding. They weren't very competitive, and yet there were a couple teams that were just on the up scale in smaller conferences, and they didn't get in the tournament. And maybe the numbers for the RPI and the KPI led to that. But if you look at production also, if you look at kills per game, points scored per game, and points given per set, for instance, if you look at those numbers, along with the power rankings, you can see teams producing and not producing. Now, given that, then you look to how should we be letting those other teams in the tournament because they're on the upswing and they're hot and they're coming into the tournament and they provide more pizzazz to the tournament. But then when we get to possibly a revenue sharing thing where you're starting to get credits for being in the tournament and your conference gets, then those conferences are going to lobby like Stanky does for the SEC and those other people. They're going to lobby like mad to get 8 to 10 or 12 teams in the tournament because it's money back to the conference teams,
Well, and I think to that point, yes. But if Greg Sankey cares that how many SEC teams are in the volleyball championship, then like hell yeah, like let's get that. Like I don't care what we need to do, but those are those things. I think there's some other dynamics that we can start to come into play that would be tremendous for the growth of our championship. And I'm going to say this knowing that it may be not popular, and I recognize the criticism I might open myself to. But if there was more opportunity for those sports fans that enjoy putting a little money on a game, had the easy ability to do so and watch these games, and ESPN had their bracket. Okay, they did their bracket challenge. Ren Athletics did one as well. So we have 2 entities that are providing prize money for people to fill out the brackets. The more engagement that we get, like all of us love just watching the volleyball because it's great volleyball. But if we want mass viewership, people want to find some other way to engage. And so I think as this grows, as the exposure grows, I think we're going to see greater ways for just general sports fans to engage in the championship, which absolutely helps.
Jamie, I think one of the things we were concerned about that Jim was, a little bit nicer about presenting was he had looked at 5 teams from major conferences that were the 9th place team or the 8th place team in that conference, and looked at, the other teams that they were playing against, and 5 of those teams got beat by mid-majors. Why are they in the tournament and knocking out 5 other second place, mid-major teams that probably ought to have been in that tournament?
I obviously can't comment to what happened in that room, would love to, but this is one of the things that I think is again really good for our sport, is to have this dialogue. But this is one of the, I think, components of any selection committee, whether it's volleyball, whether it's basketball, is the committee gets a series of things that they get to look at. And they're not necessarily all weighted, but hey, these are all of the factors that we can use to build the best field possible. Each committee, though, still can value certain things over others, and that's, I think, maybe the beauty, but also some of the frustration of a committee. And if they say, hey, you know what, we really value the entire body of work, so we're not going to devalue a big match that you had at the beginning of the season, and we're gonna really give you credit for that. Others may really feel like, hey, this is that momentum. What's happening in the last 10 games of the season? What does that start to do? And you know, the dynamic of a committee will sort of adjust with that. So I think there's, as long as there have been committees selecting, there's going to be criticisms or ideas on how this can be done best. And again, the way that I also sort of look at it too is there is also a second postseason event, which is the NIVC. And I think as a sport, I don't know that we embrace that postseason event as well as we should. And a team that just was short of getting in should be looking at like, hey, I want to play postseason. That is good. When you're continuing to play in the season, that's good. When an administrator is when you still have the press releases going out, your social media accounts, all of those things. And so I would also say that if we want to continue to build that stuff, we probably also need to look at embracing that second postseason event as well, and try to elevate our game through that avenue also.
Okay, you've been out to a couple of games. Tell us a little bit about the Division III and what you're doing moving forward here this weekend.
Yeah, so I think this is what's like super exciting about our sport. So I was in Salem, Virginia last week, and I got to watch the opening rounds of the Division III championship of their final site of 8 teams. And I was sitting there watching John Hopkins and Wisconsin Oshkosh, and it was phenomenal volleyball. Like, it was really good. It was compelling. It was exciting. There was great ball, great strategy. I don't want to hate on other sports, but I can tell you there's a good list of sports that if I was at their Division III championship, I would be bored out of my mind, because the level and our sport presents itself to where it is so good and so exciting at multiple levels. Tomorrow, I'm heading to Iowa for the NAIA finals, and then we'll head up to South Dakota to watch the start of the Division II Elite Eight. And I'm sure that's not. NCAA doesn't like calling anything but basketball the Elite Eight, but screw it. The Elite Eight for Division II. So I'll get to go up there and watch that, and I'm excited about doing that, because again, I think our sport and the level of athletes that we have participating in it make it just a really, really fun sport to watch at any level, at any championship.
Mick, you had a question you wanted to ask Jamie before?
Yeah. Well, I haven't actually. He just created a second one for me. But what can the AVCA do to encourage these athletic directors to support their coaches that want to play in these secondary championships? I mean, I think I haven't seen any push from the association or anywhere except for the coaches to sell this concept to the ADs across the country. And I may just be out of it, because I haven't been coaching for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, but I have never seen athletic directors really get too excited about a secondary championship.
Yeah. I mean, I'll share that I have reached out directly to ADs that are, their teams would be in consideration to try to, let them know the importance of it. I would say though, honestly, Mick, it needs to start with our coaches. And I've actually had some challenges, convincing our coaches that it's a good thing. Because there's this feeling of like, well, if it's not the NCAA, then I'm lowering myself to it. And I think, based on the team that you have, it can be a tremendous opportunity of growth.
Agreed.
When I was coaching, we participated in the event. We didn't perform well, but it was critical for us because the next year we made it to the NCAA tournament and was able to get a first round win. And I guarantee that we didn't have that. We would not have done that had our team not had that experience of going through December play. And so I think coaches need to be having those conversations with their administration in August about, hey, I got a great team. Yes, we're going for an NCAA tournament, but we're going for postseason. And if it's not this, it's this, and this is what the expense is. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's what I'm asking from you. So I think those conversations need to happen well before late October and November as well.
Well, I totally agree with that. I think that's great advice, and I just know that many of the teams that I've seen go into the tournament and do well actually really come into the following season way more organized and competitive. So I like that concept too. But I wanted to ask you one last question. What are the best tactics going forward to keep our men's volleyball teams growing?
Yeah, it's one of the things that I have a lot of conversations with as I'm having those conversations in Congress or with NCAA or other coaches associations. I think there are some things that I'm trying to work through to get in place that as some of this legislation, potential federal legislation, comes into play, we're kind of asking for an end. All right. So yes, do this and also protect this. One of those is the number of sports sponsors needed to be in Division I. Like, hey, we need to codify that 16 for FBS and 14 for FCS schools has to stay. I know that there are some administrators that would love to see that number reduced. And so I think we need to have a definite line in the sand that we stay there. Also, for Division I membership, as it's written now in the manual, you have to provide X amount of scholarships and support to sports outside of football and basketball. And it's really based off on the scholarship maximums. So as that gets rewritten, I think it's really important to have in there that there is investment into non-football and basketball sports. So that, I think, helps as well. And I'd also like to see potentially a review of roster caps for non-cost containment sports. So it makes sense to have a roster cap in football and basketball, and I'll even say women's volleyball and baseball, so that you don't go crazy with expense. But Mick, there is no reason to put a roster cap for men's volleyball. I agree. Nobody is going to put 20 scholarships or 25 scholarships into men's volleyball. And if that happens, then man, we're in a great financial place. We'll deal with it then. But I'd also like to try to find a way to advocate for the elimination of roster caps for all, again, non-revenue producing sports.
For the 55 or 60 years that I've been in the sport, one of the things that's always been a grind is that we don't have a male counterpart that allows us to go through the system like the other sports. And it's particularly grinding when many of us have helped develop the women's side and the men's side, but the women's side has taken off. And then we get held back because we don't have a male counterpart. I just feel as a volleyball coach, I've watched basketball be pulled by the bootstrings forward because they have a male counterpart. And there's money involved and all of the things that you mentioned. And yet we can't get our male counterpart out there the way we need to. And I would like to see and for the benefit of the women as much as boys volleyball, because women's volleyball will benefit as much or more if a male counterpart comes along and really starts being the hottest thing out there. And the numbers are extremely encouraging because they're the fastest growing. But in this particular situation, it looks like somebody's just put a Berlin Wall up in front of our development of our men's volleyball right now because of cost and that sort of thing. And I'd like to figure out a way to get that thing knocked down and get moving forward, because now we're going to have more boys out there that want to play and no place to play.
I think, Mick, I think there's two opportunities that I would see in helping with this. One is, and I've had already conversations with John, I think USA Volleyball can be a really good partner in this. I think there is an appetite within the NCAA to engage some of the NGBs a little bit more. That's been, I think, a priority for Charlie Baker. So I think there's some opportunities to enhance some of the championship around there. The other part, and to do this in an unapologetic way and a comfortable way, is right now with the momentum that we've been sharing about women's volleyball and the TV exposure and so, is to use some of that leverage in the conversations and the people that we're meeting. The access that women's volleyball has allowed, even within TV executives, to be able to say, hey, also look at what on the men's side. I'm pretty certain like the men's championship will be on ESPN, right? Even as we go back to women's soccer, like their championship on ESPNU, if our men's championship on that Monday is on ESPN, I do think that there is a correlation to the success that we're seeing on the women's side. And so making sure that we look to leverage those relationships and that access, I think, is also important and an opportunity there too.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, in about 2 weeks, we have a huge event happening. It's not just the NCAA Final Four, but it's the AVCA convention. And this is an opportunity for people to actually get together and have the kinds of conversations we're having now and get some clarity on a lot of the issues we've been talking about. Can you talk a little bit about the AVCA convention and the importance it is for coaches to come to Louisville and be there?
I think the convention, and I took advantage of it when I was a coach, starting as a volunteer assistant and then throughout as a head coach. There's this opportunity for professional development, for networking, for your personal growth, and that's a big part, I think, of why people first come to convention. But once you've been there for a while, you also recognize that it is the best place to help grow the sport and grow different aspects of it. And that our sport doesn't take the strides forward if key people are not there together having these conversations. And that's within coaches, that's with administrators, that's within industry, all of that to be able to come together. We're going to have a tremendous amount of presence from the FIVB here this year, from a couple of people in their heritage new department. There's new leadership at the FIVB. I'm incredibly excited that Hugh McCutcheon has been named the Secretary General of the FIVB and what that can do for the connection and growth of the sport in the U.S. and some of the collaboration that maybe has been missing in recent years from both ends. So I think it's an incredible opportunity to to be around volleyball, to be a part of the trajectory, but then also just from the personal development and again being around your friends and colleagues is always a great opportunity to sit down and have a cold beer or a hot coffee in the morning and just enjoy fellowship.
And I think you have some really outstanding presenters at the convention this year. I think Koch is doing a couple of sessions, and can you tell us a little bit about that? Hopefully to encourage high school coaches and college coaches alike to travel out to Louisville and be part of the convention and the clinic.
We've got some of the best minds in our sport that are presenting everything from on-court technical to classroom sessions to managing team dynamics. The growth of the sport, we'll have a super session where we'll have television executives on board production. John Spera, our new CEO of USA Volleyball, will be up on stage with Hugh McCutcheon. We'll have people of industry there speaking about the future of the sport as an opportunity for us to celebrate our coaches of the year, our All-Americans, players of the year. So there is way more than anybody can consume there. It almost can be like being at the Cheesecake Factory where the menu is so big and you can't decide what to order. That's kind of what the educational opportunities are like.
Well, great. Thank you very much. In behalf of the master coaches, we'd like to thank you for taking so much time out of your schedule and covering so many important topics that we jumped into today. Thank you.
Well, Bob, thanks. Again, always enjoy it. And I will be looking forward to getting that blue background in my.
All right. We'll get that to you. You'll have it before edition 4.
Yeah, that's good, Bob. We're going to hold you to that, too.
Sounds good. Take care. See you in Louisville.
All right. Well,
Thank you,
we'll
Jamie.
go ahead and transition now into our buzz reaction for a very short buzz reaction since we did an extended program. I feel like, the 60 minutes that went to 90 minutes, but reactions you guys had on some of the things that Jamie had to say.
Well, I mean, he is just a treasure trove of information. And there's just so many unknowns going on right now in our sport and college athletics in general. That anybody who can predict the future is lying to you, because no one really knows the how things are going to unfold. But it's always fun to have Jamie on. And like Mick said, we could run this thing for a couple hours, but so it guarantees a return visit by him.
Yeah, he's a fresh breath of air, though, because he's not covering his backside. I mean, he gave us some information that I thought was pretty fair and well-deserved, that normally we can't get on the air. Everybody is, trying to take care of the company store and not, we've been very supportive, and I felt deserved some of the information we got today, and he was very forthcoming with that and to his benefit. And the leadership of the AVCA, I think, is in good hands. That's what I got from this. And I think if he's making calls to athletic directors and doing those kinds of things, I think that's above and beyond. And I think that's where we need to go. And we're hot. The sport is hot. He's right. And we shouldn't just sit here and enjoy it. We should keep pushing. I know that always got me in trouble, but I always felt that, that's the only way to go. You've got to keep going, because there are 6 other sports trying to do the same thing. And it's a kind of a race to get out there in front and get people's attention. Think you're muted, Tom.
Mick, I think you're absolutely correct. And I think that Jamie is one that watches everything from volleyball, the international channel, Volleyball TV. He knows all the television things. He knows a lot about revenue. And coaches need to learn this stuff. coaches are going to have to learn how to fundraise. They're going to have to learn how to really push to get their universities to promote their sport more, because revenue is going to be the thing, and it can't be ignored anymore. And there are ADs who have been enlightened, like the ones at Colorado State University, who know that a volleyball program can bring in some ticket revenue, and it can bring in a lot of goodwill in the community, fundraising. And there are some ADs still that do not view it that way. And those are the ones that we've got to get to. And those coaches have got to play a big role in that.
You know, something came across my screen while we were doing the show that is very interesting. It said that the International Basketball Federation is getting ready to start, or at least pursuing, a professional basketball association worldwide, a challenge to the NBA, what they're doing. Jamie mentioned at the convention we're going to have a lot of international coaches. Ever since Kathy DeBoer started pushing for that 10 or 12 years ago, we've had an influx of foreign coaches at the convention that I find very refreshing to talk to. Well, you catch these guys after a clinic or after one of the presentations, and you go downstairs and sit down and have a cup of coffee. You learn all kinds of new things that are happening overseas, and they're learning how our system functions or is dysfunctional now. And so you don't know people taking advantage of those kinds of things or seeing the light and trying to do some things. So it just kind of, for me, sparked my thinking that we shouldn't be complacent here. We should do everything we can, like going to the convention in Louisville, like sitting down and talking to our friends, like entertaining wild ideas that actually might not be very wild, in fact, have some merit. You know, I love those things. I've always loved those things. I kind of have loved, and I know you guys are lifelong learners to continue to try to get better in volleyball, like I have tried to do, and these are fun times from that standpoint, but certainly scary in some other ways. So I don't know how you guys react to that, but I think the program was really good today to get information.
Well, with that, I'd like to thank all our viewers and our listeners for tuning in again. I'm Bob Bertucci, and we look forward to our next Wednesday, when we'll be back again with another episode of Master Coach's Wednesday Weekly Buzz. Now a word from our sponsor.
Let me tell you about the best net system on the market. The Edge is our all-carbon net system. It's the lightest posts on the market at 17 and 22 pounds. And it offers pin stop net height adjustments for juniors, women's, men's, and then 2 inches above each of those. So you can bump the nets up for practice. In order to accommodate different sleeve depths in the floor, we have an adjustable foot on the bottom to make fine-tuning adjustments to make sure those pin stops are accurate. These posts use our Kevlar net with the 4 Velcro tensioners to apply horizontal tension. It provides for stellar accuracy and consistency every single time. One of the nice things is the simple elegance of this post. It's quite a simple design, not a lot of replacement parts. We've tried to give you everything you need and nothing that you don't. So, if the lightest net system on the market appeals to you, we'd love to talk to you more about it.